Ever heard of Isobel Gowdie?
Isobel Gowdie.
Yeah, she was accused of witchcraft back in 17th century Scotland. But her story, well, it's not your typical witchy tale, with the cauldrons and broomsticks and whatnot.
Right, right.
We're talking fairies, flying horses, even confessions so detailed they'll leave you wondering if maybe, just maybe, she was onto something.
That's what's so fascinating about Isabel's case. It really goes beyond the typical witchcraft accusations, offering a unique glimpse into a very specific moment in history.
It's like stepping into this whirlwind of accusations, but we know so little about Isobel herself.
Exactly. We're missing that crucial backstory, which makes her case even more intriguing.
It's almost as if her story begins at the trial.
Precisely. What we do know is that she lived during the peak of the Scottish witch hunts, which spanned the 16th and 17th centuries. A tumultuous time, to say the least.
Oh, absolutely. Social and political upheaval was off the charts. And then there was King James and that infamous book of his, Demonology.
Oh yes, King James.
Talk about setting the stage for how people viewed witchcraft. Tolerance wasn't exactly his strong suit, but it wasn't just the monarchy, was it? Religion played a huge part, too.
Absolutely. Figures like the Laird of Park, a powerful landowner near where Gowdie lived, were deeply devout and saw the devil's influence everywhere. The fear of witchcraft was palpable, fueled by genuine beliefs, but also, let's be honest, stoked by those in power.
And when you throw in a string of bad harvests, political turmoil after King Charles I lost his head, well, you've got a recipe for mass hysteria.
It's true. Accusing someone of witchcraft became a convenient scapegoat for difficult times.
Right. And that's where Isobel's story takes this even more fascinating turn. Her confessions.
For concessions, yes.
Over 6 weeks, she gave 4 detailed accounts of her supposed witchcraft. And we're not talking vague admissions here. She dives deep into everything.
It's that level of detail that sets Gowdie's confessions apart. She doesn't just say she attended these gatherings, she paints a vivid picture.
Meeting the devil, attending those secretive gatherings known as covens, she held nothing back.
Flying on magical horses, feasting on lavish meals, even squeezing through windows to enter homes.
Windows! Who thinks of that?
It's both comical and unsettling, wouldn't you say?
Comical until you remember the context, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And then there's the Queen of Elfham. Water bowls. Where does she come up with this stuff? It's those vivid details that really stick with you.
Gowdie's confessions, they blend the traditional imagery of demonic witchcraft with these almost whimsical elements of Scottish fairy lore.
It's like she's pulling details from different realities, and the sheer volume of information is incredible. Chants, spells, she even claimed to be able to shapeshift.
Oh, the shape-shifting, quite a popular claim in witchcraft accusations.
But a cat, a horse, a jackdaw. A jackdaw. Who thinks of a jackdaw? It makes you wonder, was any of this real, or was it all just a product of her imagination?
Now that is the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's what makes Gowdie's case such an enduring puzzle. Why confess to such elaborate, outlandish acts?
Was she delusional? Or was something more calculated at play?
It's possible both played a role. And to understand that, we need to delve deeper into the circumstances surrounding her confessions.
So we're left with this woman, Isobel, caught in this web of accusations, confessing to things that, well, they really blur the lines.
It's certainly tempting to think she was forced into it, especially given the era.
Oh, absolutely. Torture was practically a given in witch trials back then.
Right. But Gowdie's case is particularly interesting because just before her trial, the Privy Council, they issued a proclamation. They were trying to put a stop to the, shall we say, more enthusiastic interrogation methods.
So no more torturing people into confessing.
Well, not quite. They forbade torture unless it was directly authorized by the council themselves.
So a bit of a loophole there.
Exactly. It really highlights the complexities of power at play. They wanted to limit the use of torture, sure, but there were ways around it.
And I imagine enforcement was, well, a bit lax.
Precisely. And even without physical torture, there were plenty of ways to, shall we say, persuade someone to confess.
Oh, absolutely. Solitary confinement, sleep deprivation.
Relentless psychological pressure.
It's chilling when you think about it. And Isobel, as a poor farmer's wife, she wouldn't have had much protection against any of that.
Very true. So while we can't definitively say she was physically tortured, the possibility of intense psychological pressure, it definitely can't be ruled out.
No, not at all. But even if we put aside the question of coercion for a moment, there's still the content of these confessions. They're so detailed, so strange. I mean, could there be other explanations? What was she? I don't know.
Some scholars have theorized that she might have suffered from a condition called ergotism.
Ergotism. I'm not familiar with that one.
It's actually a bit unsettling. It's caused by a fungus, you see. This fungus, it can grow on rye bread, which was a staple food in Scotland back then. And what's interesting is that ergotism, it can cause some rather, shall we say, vivid side effects.
Vivid how?
Hallucinations, convulsions, even psychosis in some cases.
Oh, wait, so you're saying bad bread could be the culprit behind some of these witchcraft accusations? Talk about a bad rap for a sandwich.
It really does make you think, doesn't it? Back then, something we'd consider a simple health issue could have such dire consequences.
It's tragic, but I don't know, could ergotism really explain everything? The fairies, the flying horses, it seems like there's still something more to uncover.
You're right to be skeptical. While ergotism might have played a role in her perceptions, it's unlikely to be the whole story. We also have to consider the immense societal pressures at the time, especially for women.
Especially under the watchful eye of someone like the Laird of Park, who saw witchcraft everywhere. It's like she couldn't escape suspicion, even in her own home.
Precisely. And that's where things get even more interesting. When we really dig into Gowdie's confessions, we start to see hints of, well, something else. Something beyond delusion or coercion.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What kind of hints?
Well, take the feasts she describes, for example.
The lavish ones, fit for royalty?
Exactly. On the surface, just another fantastical detail, right? But some scholars see it as a reflection of her own hunger, a longing for something more than her meager existence.
Fascinating. So she's projecting her own desires, her frustrations onto these confessions.
It's a possibility. And it's not just the feasts. Consider those elf arrows again.
What about them?
Think about it. They could be interpreted as a metaphor for her own powerlessness, a way of expressing the anger and resentment she might have felt toward those in power.
It's amazing how these details, things that seem so fantastical at first glance, they can actually offer glimpses into the very real struggles of her life. But there's still one element we haven't really touched on. The fairies. They feel so different from the usual demonic imagery of witchcraft. Why include them? What do you think drew her to that particular bit of folklore?
That's where Gowdie's confessions become truly unique. It's the blending of traditional demonic imagery with these elements of Scottish folklore, particularly the fairy realm, that make her case so compelling.
It's like she's tapping into something, well, something beyond the realm of the church and the courts. I can see the appeal, especially in her situation.
Exactly. And we have to remember that Scotland, particularly the Highlands where she lived, had this incredibly rich tradition of fairy folklore.
Oh, I bet. But we're not talking like Tinkerbell and pixie dust here, right?
Right. These weren't your sweet, whimsical fairies. These were powerful beings, often dangerous, capable of both helping and harming.
So more like forces of nature than storybook characters.
Precisely. And for someone like Isobel Gowdie, living in a time that must have felt so chaotic, so frightening, well, the fairy realm, it might have offered a kind of escape.
Or even a way to explain the unexplainable.
Exactly. Or maybe even a way to connect with a different kind of power, one that operated outside those rigid structures of the church and the state.
So it's not just about escaping reality, but maybe even shaping it on her own terms, even if that reality was, well, a little unorthodox, to say the least.
Precisely. Whether it was a conscious decision or perhaps a subconscious way of coping, you can't really know for sure. But those layers of meaning, the way they offer us these glimpses into her inner world, that's what continues to fascinate us centuries later.
And fascinate they did. Her case, it even played a role in those early theories about organized witchcraft, didn't it?
It did. Back in the early 20th century, there was a folklorist, Margaret Murray. She actually used Gowdie's confessions, along with other historical accounts, to support this theory that witchcraft was actually, well, she believed, it was the remnants of an ancient organized pagan religion.
Hold on. So instead of seeing it as these isolated acts of, evil or whatever, she thought it was a whole structured belief system that had just gone underground.
Exactly. She pointed to things like the covens, the rituals, the devil himself, as evidence of this pre-Christian faith that had somehow managed to survive.
Wow. That's quite a different take.
It was a radical idea at the time, to say the least. And while Murray's theories have been, shall we say, reevaluated since then, they did do something important. They captured the public's imagination. They made people look at these historical accounts in a whole new light.
It's like she gave Isobel's story this whole other life.
Exactly. And while we might never truly know what was going on in Isobel Gowdie's mind, her story, it still has so much to teach us.
It reminds us that history is messy, complicated. There aren't always easy answers.
And that sometimes the most captivating stories, are the ones that leave us with more questions than answers.
So what do you think, listeners? Was Isobel Gowdie a cunning manipulator, a victim of circumstance, or something else entirely? We may never know for sure. But one thing's for certain. Her story, it challenges us to look beyond the surface, to really grapple with the complexities of the past, and to try to understand how people navigated these really extraordinary situations. And that's what makes this deep dive into Isobel Gowdie's world so fascinating. It's a reminder that history is full of these incredible stories, these captivating, often heartbreaking stories, just waiting for us to uncover them.